Right now, on Law&Crime special report, Justice and Peace. In the wake of nationwide demonstrations, the tragic death of 23-year-old Elijah McClain in August of 2019 is getting renewed interest. McClain was left brain dead after a 15-minute interaction with officers after an individual called 911, identifying him as a suspicious person committing no crimes. Plus, the Georgia legislature passed a new hate crime bill following the death of Ahmaud Arbery. The bill, awaiting to be signed by Governor Kemp, passed with bipartisan support.
I'm happy, but at the same time, I have to snap it back into reality that Ahmaud is gone. But, you know, his name will live forever, I think.
Later, a viral story of 3 NYPD officers being poisoned by milkshakes from Shake Shack has been debunked. According to new reports, the officers lied about being sick, but why did these allegations go so far?
One reported the shake had a bleach smell. They were taken to the hospital, treated, and released.
Justice and Peace bring you inside the movement for police reform. It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. All right, so let's jump right into today's program because we've got a lot to talk about. First, Elijah McClain. Now, this is an incident that happened back in August of 2019, but didn't get the attention that warranted such a tragic death, partly because of how the investigation rolled out, but also the lack of cell phone footage that we see in so many other cases that we are so fervent or so aggressive about protesting, because we can really see that loss of life, or for whatever reason why people protest or really become agitated about these deaths. But let's talk about Mr. McClain. To give a little background, this is an individual who was walking home from a convenience store. Mr. McClain had a ski mask where it looked like a t-shirt across his face where you can only see his eyes because, according to his family, he was anemic and he suffered from cold spells. So he'd feel cold even in the heat of August summers. Now he's covered up and he's walking down the street, headphones in, and according to a 911 call, he is moving his arms in the air and making no threats. There's no crime that anyone can see from the start of this interaction to today. However, based on the interactions between the officers and Mr. McClain, he later died of brain damage some days later in the hospital. He was unresponsive after the police interacted with him, but let's see what that interaction looks like and some of the allegations the officers made to justify their use of force.
Stop. Let me go of me. No, let go of me. Chill out. No, I am an introvert. Please respect the boundaries that I am speaking. Relax. Stop. I'm going home.
Relax, or I'm going to have to change this situation.
Dude, leave me alone.
Sir, can you please cooperate?
You leave me alone.
No, we're gonna talk to you.
You guys started to arrest me, and I was stopping my music to listen. Now let go of me. Get up.
You guys
take my power back, and I intend to be
humbled with him, okay?
centered. No, I intend to be centered.
Just grab your gun, dude. Stop, dude.
Give us more. Give us some more units. We're fighting them.
Now, you're gonna have to watch that video like we did multiple times, over and over and over again, to see what the officers are claiming, that he grabbed the gun, then it changes later in this video that he reached for the gun. To me, it appears that it's an involuntary movement as 2 people are pushing you up against the wall and you're trying to explain, I'm an introvert, I'm just different, that's all, I'm sorry, I have no gun, I don't have that stuff. Now, I have 2 guests with me. I have Emily Galvin-Almanza, the Executive Director for Partners for Justice, as well as Louis L. Reed, the National Organizer for #Cut50, as well as a licensed clinician with us today. Now, when I first saw that, the first thing I thought to myself was, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not claiming that he is, I thought he was autistic. Because I have in my profession as a defense attorney, as well as a youth soccer coach, worked with clients and young people who are autistic, and the way that he described his interaction with them screamed to me, there is something that goes beyond just the normal here of what you and I may have, and I don't mean normal derogatorily, and I apologize if I use that incorrectly, but he's trying to explain this as best as possible. Louis L. Reed, I want you to jump in here first. What are you seeing from this video?
Well, look, you don't need more degrees than a thermometer to understand that this person who had this unfortunately tragic interaction with law enforcement essentially was indicating that, look, I'm not a threat. Other than the fact that I have black skin and I am walking down the street to a convenience store with my face wrapped in a shirt or whatever the article of clothing was, and I am listening, to my music. And from what I heard in the clip that you just played, it sounded like he said he was listening to his music. So the 911 caller says that there's a guy who's walking down the street with his face covered, with his hands in the air. I can tell you, right? Anytime I put on Meek Mill, I'm throwing my hands in the air and I'm waving them like it just doesn't care. That doesn't necessarily constitute as a criminal act of conduct. And so, the fact that he seemed to be very articulate as it relates to his own personal grounding. Look, I am an introvert. I have done nothing wrong. I'm just listening to my music. I am, walking from the store. It sounds like he was actually trying to engage the officer with some degree of de-escalation before it actually got to where it was. And I'm just absolutely appalled. And quite frankly, as an African-American man in this country, I'm sick. I'm sick and tired of just being sick and tired of seeing interactions as such.
Yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer there, sick and tired of being sick and tired. I think we're all in the same place, Louis. Emily, let's go to you. Louis brings up some great points that he's actually the one trying to de-escalate. The officers are the one who are ratcheting this interaction up at every point possible. What are you making of this initial interaction?
I think we're seeing something really typical that we see a lot when we see incidents of police violence. One thing I did want to note is I went to the trouble of looking up the weather that night in Aurora, Colorado, which is a pretty high altitude town. The low that night was 54 degrees. It's not unusual that a person would be bundled up or listening to music or dancing. I will note the absolutely penetrating systemic and structural racism we're seeing here, because I guarantee you that if I was standing on a street corner dancing in Aurora, Colorado, not one person would call the police. So it's a really widespread, massive problem. But drilling into what the police are doing here, you see something that we as public defenders and we as people who work in the justice system or the criminal system see quite frequently, which is a situation where a person is doing nothing wrong, has committed no crime, has been contacted by police for no reason other than the color of their skin. And because the police are preparing to engage in violence, whether that's a violent takedown or another form of police brutality, they are coming up with reasons as a pretense, essentially, for violence, saying he attempted to grab the gun. I remember one of my first trial cases was a case where an officer swore up and down that a young woman I was representing had attempted to hit her. We had a clear video of the entire incident. My client had not moved, let alone cocked a fist. And yet the officer felt so comfortable lying that even when confronted with video, she continued to insist there'd been a fist cocking. I think we're seeing the same thing here, where officers are creating a situation that gives them the prerequisite they need to get away with engaging in violent misconduct.
Yeah, and to Emily's point, I think they know what DAs and judges are looking for to give them that easy out. Let's look at another clip that I think is very telling of, I believe it looks like a supervisor trying to understand the situation and what his words are.
Relax, just relax. Relax, relax. Relax. All right, bring that arm back. We'll get him covered. Guy's arm back. Where's his other hand? Good. We got it right here. It's in a bar hammer. Okay. Stop. Okay. I got reason to stop. Okay. All right, side. I'm going to straddle him, figure for his legs. Recovery position. Trust me. Recovery. I have his legs. I have his legs. I have no ID. Right here. Where's it? He's not body. I have no ID. It's 218. We got him detained. He's still fighting us on the ground. My name's Elijah McClain. Yeah, that's all. I'm going to use carotid. That's what I was doing. I was just going home. Why? I'm an introvert and I'm different. Come out? No. Was he out? I heard some snoring. I just don't like going home. I'm just different. I'm just different. That's all. That's all I was doing. It was actually Rosenberg. I'm so sorry. You're done, dude. I have no gun. That's where I tried karate. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Other units that are not here. Why were you telling me? I don't go drugs. I don't even kill flies. I don't eat meat. I'm not a vegetarian. I don't judge people for anything. I try to live a secret.
When we showed him up,
and all life.
he was wearing skis.
And I respect all life.
And walking, so I mean, that's on.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
All I was trying to do was become better.
We started it because he reached for
It was
Rosie's
like
gun.
Nikola Tesla.
And we had him on the wall. All right.
And I'll do it. I'll do it.
All right, what do you guys
no other suspicious. Can you
Nobody
my
else
camera?
my camera
in the grass right here.
to help all life. I will do it.
Okay. One of you guys might contact you the
So it's a little hard to hear because you have Elijah McClain in the foreground and then you have the supervisor in the background. You're hearing Elijah McClain saying things like, I don't even kill flies, I don't eat meat, I'm different, but I don't judge people. I don't judge people who eat meat. Forgive me, forgive me. And you're hearing the supervisor in the background, and if you watch videos that go beyond the small clips we can show you, you have a supervisor there saying, well, what did he do? What's the crime that he committed? Go back and call the person who called 911 and try to figure out what it is. And we all come to the same conclusion that no crime was committed. But the initial interaction is violence. They walked into that situation thinking, we need to arrest him. We need to detain him. We need to use force. And if you look back in the beginning, there's actually no instructions. So, Louis, I'm thinking to myself, the typical argument we hear here is, hey, man, just follow instructions and you'll be all right. But what were the instructions here? What was he supposed to follow?
Look, literally watching that clip, it's hard for me to even zero in on what the supervisor was saying because Elijah's voice is penetrating my spirit. He's saying, please, I can't breathe. My name is Elijah McClain. He is saying to the officers what every Black family in America tells our children when they leave the house. Anytime you are accosted by law enforcement, be polite, be respectful, give them your name, don't make any sudden movements, make sure that your hands are visible at all times. He, even if there's an inference that he was on a spectrum, his spider senses as a Black man in America kicked in, where he went through that mental checklist, even as while he was subdued on the ground, gasping for air, as we saw in George Floyd's situation, he is still trying to maintain a level of respect. And I can tell you, as someone who has served almost 14 years in federal prison, who has had more share of interactions with law enforcement than a little bit, this penetrates me to such a degree. And I can tell you that Black men in America have long been the boogeyman in the psyches of white law enforcement in particular. And that just, I don't even have words. I don't even have words to articulate how I feel about what we just saw in that hit.
And I think Louis, I feel your struggle, and I feel it in many ways because last night, my brother, who's 20 years old, I literally have a tattoo across my wrist that says, I am my brother's keeper. And he comes to me and he says, Brian, you're my older brother, you're a lawyer, you're on these TV shows. How do I not become a hashtag? And I don't even have the answers for him. So it becomes a situation that is like, you can't even say like, oh, just do this and you'll be okay. Because you watch this and there's no answer. And so with Emily, looking at how this played out, why are we not seeing charges here? Because it seems like criminal negligence, homicide. It seems like murder in the second degree to me. I don't see why we're being stonewalled here, sorry, especially when this has been going on for so long.
What's been pointed out here is that what we've seen is an absolutely brutal murder of a person who is so young as to essentially be a child who did nothing wrong, as you both have pointed out. If this could happen to Elijah McClain, There is nothing a person can do to protect themselves. Truly, there's no right behavior. There's no right answer. There's nothing that can keep a person safe, that can keep a Black man safe from police violence in this country. And the fact that it took until now, this happened in August of last year, the fact that it took until now for national attention, and that there's been no action, really, in Colorado, no prosecution of the officers who, qualified immunity or not, there is no legal world in which law enforcement has the right to walk up to a person who is clearly not violating any law and murder them. The inaction we've seen in response to this is indicative of the staggering amount of power police have amassed in our society, along with prosecutors. I must say the police are not solely to blame. They work with prosecutors who rely on them to make their cases. So you have a system that is constructed on the basis of false fears and hysteria that has been allowed to commit absolutely brutal crimes against ordinary people. If anyone can watch what happened to Elijah McClain and not be shocked and moved, we've lost a part of our humanity. So the only excuse for inaction is, in my mind, an absolutely paralyzing level of corruption in the system we've constructed.
And kind of to that, before we shift gears, and I really hate the fact that we have to shift gears, also the autopsy was a major component in this case as to why they say they couldn't go forward. And when you look at the autopsy, and they talk about 3 different ways this could have happened, whether because the ultimate decision was it was undetermined. They said, well, it could have been an accident because it could have been an adverse reaction to drugs. Not heroin or cocaine or anything in the system. They gave him ketamine to calm him down, believing he had drugs, and they gave it to him not knowing would he react to it. Now, I'm told we got to go to break. We will come back after the break. I'm hoping we can continue this a little bit more. I know we got a lot to talk about, but we'll be back right after this break. All right, so we're back. We're going to continue with the Elijah McClain case because we were talking about the autopsy report. And I know that we all have a history in the criminal justice system in one way, shape, or form. But I want to talk about the autopsy for 2 reasons. 1, because of what the determination was, and 2, because of how it was played out. 1, it was found to be undetermined as to why or how he died, the manner or the reason why he died. 1 was adverse drug reaction. And one would think that, okay, he had something in his system, and because of the fight, that's why he died. No. Elijah McClain was given ketamine to calm him down when they believed that he was on drugs, which is ludicrous to me, because even when you're being given a drug in the hospital, doctors have to inform you of what they're giving you if you're not incapacitated. He was not incapacitated. He could speak to them. He could articulate what was going on. They just ignored that and gave him a drug not knowing what could happen. That, as a doctor, would be a crime, but they've got a badge, so let's move on. The other, they said, is, well, maybe it had to do with some sort of mental health issue because he was not typical or atypical, as they may describe, and because of that, in conjunction with the officer's response, that's why he died, but it's still not a homicide. That makes no sense to me. If I have a bad heart and someone comes and attacks me and causes me to have a heart attack, that's some level of manslaughter or low-level murder. The other, they say, it could be homicide. And based on that, the district attorney is saying, well, we can't go forward. But that's garbage. Because if you're not wearing a badge and it's undetermined as to whether or not you died, but you can show that you are the causation of that person's death, and they arrest you and charge you and they figure it out later. Emily and Lewis are here with us now. Emily, we'll start with you. What do you make of this autopsy and the findings? And I forgot to add, during the autopsy, 2 representatives from the police department were there, along with 1 from the DA's office. So take that as you see it.
You know, I find myself often in the position of assuming everyone knows everything that we know from working inside the system and assuming that things don't need to be explained. But let's back up and explain what team people are playing for. Prosecutors rely on police to testify as the witnesses in their cases and to bring them evidence. They rely on their labs the same way. That means lab doctors and lab clinicians and scientists who test drugs and who perform autopsies and who do other forms of scientific analysis are playing for the same team as the prosecutors and the police. They work together, they are colleagues, and they rely on each other to do their work. So to me, something that we saw again in the George Floyd autopsy is this situation where you may have a coroner or whoever is performing the autopsy doing what I might think of as like an apologist autopsy, where wiggle room is put in case the system chooses not to prosecute its own actors. You are absolutely right, Brian. If this was an ordinary person without a badge, they would be charged criminally and also civilly. Not to go into the eggshell skull plaintiff rule, but yeah, you're right. If you cause harm to another person and that person dies, even if you did not intend to cause death, it is still your fault. So this would be a slam dunk case for a prosecutor if they weren't trying to prosecute police, which, as we know, gives them the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, Louis, same thing. We're hearing all of these reports. We have the body cam video. I see at least criminal negligent homicide and manslaughter. I'm not even going into the murders. I know that's a little contested, but what's the issue here? It's been since what, August? We're in almost July now?
So look, I'm going to defer to both of you as my colleagues as being the legal beagles on this subject. But this is what I will say. Prior to my 14-year matriculation through the Federal Bureau of Prisons as 139599014, which is my federal registration number, I was a medic and I worked for American Medical Response. Not only was I a medic, but I was raised by my grandmama, who was a lifelong registered nurse. My daughter is a registered nurse. Her mother is a registered nurse. So I come from a family of healthcare providers. I can tell you this. This sounds like something that was absolutely where it sounds like something where the first responders were complicit in what is happening. I have never responded to a call as a medic where I was going to administer any form of substance, any form of drugs, without first making sure that we took what we call a sample history. And, that's a mnemonic to ascertain as to whether or not the individual had some type of allergic reaction to certain medications, so on and so forth. And quite frankly, I don't think that there was a need to administer. There was no need to administer any type of substance in whatever way, shape, or form because someone was so-called combative.
Absolutely agree. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who are watching. Sorry we couldn't get to the other stories, but we'll continue tomorrow with Justice and Peace. We have Bob Bianchi coming up next. We'll see you all tomorrow.